we'll move over to Zechariah. It's just amazing how much God cares about you and me. What God's doing to try to encourage us to salvation, to a deeper commitment to Him. God cares what we do with His Word. He cares what we do with everything that's about us. It just gets down to how much we care about what He's done about us. We're familiar with John 3:16. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in Him should not perish, but have everlasting life. But verse 17 says, for God sent not His Son into the world to condemn the world. Now just slow up a little bit and try to digest or internalize that. For God sent not His Son into the world to condemn the world. The intent of Jesus was not to condemn the world. The intent of Jesus is that we would be saved by looking into what He's got to say and make an application of that to our lives. But it has to be applied. It has to be cared that we understand what God has got to say. Now, God has done all sorts of things to try to gain my attention, your attention. There was just an episode in Midland, I believe. It was between Midland and Odessa. That's to gain your attention. El Paso is to gain your attention. Dayton is to gain your attention. The floods on our East Coast are to gain our attention. The brutal heat and fires that are on the West Coast and in Brazil are to gain our attention. God created the world in 6 days. God will uncreate the world in 1 day. But God is always working to get my attention and say, this is my world. I will do with it as I please, but all of it is intended to gain your attention and the attention of as many as I can gain. I love you. But I insist that you return that love. I insist that you return my love. Well, Lord, with what you did to give me to express your love, it doesn't sound to me that your request is out of line, that you want me to return your love. John 14:15, He said, if you love me, keep my commandments. John 15:14 says, you're my friends if you do whatsoever I command you. God's trying to explain to us that He loves us, but there's a degree of detail that counts. And I've got to go to see the detail. Well, I follow even further. God, in the flood, said that you've allowed yourselves to go too far in sin. We're going to start over again. Start over with 8. Those that will get on the boat is the do-over. Oh. And then 19 and 20 of Genesis, Sodom and Gomorrah. I understand that to be 1.5 million to 2 million people there. God pulled out 4. One of them looked back. So God pulled out 3. I look all the way through. We did not handle ourselves correctly. And we went into Assyrian captivity. That's 10 tribes of our brethren. Assyrian captivity not to be brought back. The first commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is likened unto this, to love your neighbor as yourself. That's Matthew 22, 34 through 40. And I understand that how we treat people counts, that how we esteem God counts. And everything else is contingent upon those as the two. Now there's more detail than that. But those are the two that would generalize the way we prioritize, the way we conduct ourselves. Well, Israel went off into Assyrian captivity, not to be brought back as a unit again. Judah went off into Babylonian captivity. They were to come back. But the purpose of Babylonian captivity was to teach us. To teach us. Did we learn anything? The purpose of the wilderness wanderings when we came out of Egypt was to teach us. Did we learn anything? What was I to learn in the wilderness? God said you were to learn that I can take care of you. I gave you your food only one day at a time until Friday. And then I gave you 2 days because I didn't want you out gathering food on the Sabbath. So it wasn't about me not being able to produce food at a greater rate. I could produce food at a greater rate because I am the God of this world. I chose not to produce food other than for those that would obey me. And if you obeyed me and only went to gather food one day at a time, then your food never contaminated. And 2 days on your Friday, and then your food would last 2 days. I'm trying to teach you to depend on me. I'm trying to teach you to respect me. And I'm beginning to understand what God is saying. Well, we went into Babylonian captivity as Judah to learn something. And then God, through an ungodly king, I'm to Ezra now. God, through an ungodly king, Cyrus, the king of Persia. Does God control the lives of the godly and the ungodly? Does God work through the godly and the ungodly? And He does that which He wants to do through whom He wants to do it. And Cyrus, you can look at the first 4 verses of Ezra, for some reason decided, as he whipped Babylon and took over, anybody wants to go home can go home. Anybody wants to go home can go home. And that was just exactly what was done as you look at your Ezra book and what he's trying to say to us. And I think I just find it so interesting the way that he has handled himself throughout all of Scripture. And we were to go home. I've lost Ezra. Here it is. You see 1 through 4? But then he goes on, and look at 5. Then rose up the chief of the fathers of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites, with all them whose spirit God hath raised. You see that? To go up and build the house of the Lord, which is at Jerusalem. He brought them back. You go into chapter 2, and you see in chapter 2 all the families of the people that would choose to go back. And they were to rebuild their city, Jerusalem. And they were to rebuild that which had been set forth. But then look in chapter 5. Then the prophets Haggai and Zechariah And all the Jews at Judah and Jerusalem in the name of God and of Israel even unto them. Then rose up Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel and Jeshua the son of Jozadak, and began to build the house of God which is in Jerusalem, and with them were the prophets of God helping them. But you can look at verse 16. And all they got done was the foundation built. And they ran into some opposition and they quit. Well, now they'd gone home and they somehow remembered what they were to do. They were to rebuild their city, rebuild their temple. I find it so interesting. If you look at 3 and 12, but many of the priests and Levites, the chief of the fathers, who were ancient men that had seen the first house, I underline that, that's Solomon's temple, that was ornate, unbelievable, gorgeous. When the foundation of this house was laid before their eyes, they wept with a loud voice. They cried. They saw what the temple that was to build, rebuilt, if you please, and they looked at the foundation. It was so much smaller than was Solomon's temple. And they realized that they were less, they were smaller, and that this is what it's going to be. And the old men that had been in captivity, when they saw the new foundation, they cried. But the young men, as you read on, and many shouted aloud for joy. The young men were thrilled. We're rebuilding the temple, but they hadn't seen the old. They only saw the new, and they were thrilled. Isn't that interesting? The difference in the response all in the same verse. The ones that had seen Solomon's temple cried. Why? Because they'd allowed everything to get away from them. Think about that. Think about that. We've got a Lord's church. As long as there are people that will struggle to see that it stays and that it exists, and that old-fashioned doctrines, if you please, are held firm to. But that can be lost. And the young will not know what that old was unless we train the young as to what they need to know. That's what he's talking about there in 3:12. I look on, then 5, we read it, 1 through 3. And basically, God sent now 2 prophets. We're back from captivity. I'm giving us the history working through. All we got left in our Old Testament at this point is Ezra, Nehemiah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. But Malachi is going to be later than Haggai and Zechariah. And now we're looking at Zechariah, trying to encourage them and to get them to do that which they need to do. We've already studied Haggai. I want us to look at Zechariah. We've already looked at the first part of Zechariah. But he's telling them 2 things. Look at Zechariah 1:3. And what he's saying is, turn ye unto me, saith the Lord of hosts, and I will turn unto you. Turn to me and I will turn to you. God says, I'll meet you. If you'll turn to me, I'll turn to you. Do we feel like we've turned to him and therefore he has turned to us? What he's going to give us in the course of Zechariah, the first 8 chapters, are visions that Zechariah got to try to explain to them where they were. Now, we've been looking at Sunday morning Bible class, the purpose of the priesthood, the high priest. And basically, as the people go, The priest is the one that would direct it, that would lead them in it. And the priest had the responsibility of cleansing the nation, cleansing the tabernacle, cleansing the temple, cleansing the people. His was that job. Well, what we're going to find in chapter 3 is, but the high priest is dirty. The high priest himself must be cleaned up because he's dirty. Boy, that begs the realization that the fact of those who have the lead job in hoping that we stay clean may not be clean themselves. And they have got to be cleaned up. 1 John 4:1 says, "Beloved, believe not every spirit, but try the spirits whether they're of God, because many false prophets are gone out into the world." I have the responsibility of knowing enough Bible to know if what's being said is true or false. It's not enough that I assemble. It's enough that I know enough to be able to believe not every spirit, but try the spirits whether they're of God, because many false prophets are gone out into the world. Well, see, in the case of the Old Testament, if the high priest was dirty, the rest of us didn't have a chance to be clean. But under the new covenant, watch this, is the priesthood of all believers. You are your own priest. You are offering your sacrifice. There's no one to offer your sacrifice but you. Now, it might be as a congregation we're doing much, but as a congregation is not the way we'll be judged. As an individual is the way that I will be judged. Am I doing very much? Oh, well, I guess that kind of changes things. Let me establish the text that verifies the priesthood of all believers. He said, "But you're a royal nation, a holy priesthood, a peculiar people, that you should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light." You who were not a people are now the people of God. Oh, you who had not obtained mercy have now obtained mercy. The people of God. But I'm individually responsible to offer my own sacrifice. Romans 12:1 and 2 says, "I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service," or worship. It is reasonable, God says through Paul, that I figure out that that's what I am indebted for. I owe my body as a living sacrifice. He says, "And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed," or cross-formed, "by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is the good and acceptable and perfect will of God." It's all a mind change. My mind recognizes the need for that level of commitment. Now let's look at chapter 3 of Zechariah and see if we don't see exactly what's being set forth with that as a background. There are 4 characters. If you write in the Bible, you put a little number and a circle around it. "And he showed me Joshua the high priest." There's the high priest. "Standing before the angel of the Lord." There's your second character. It's like a one-act play. "And Satan," there's your third character, "standing at the right hand to resist him." Satan is resisting Joshua and the angel of the Lord. And then, of course, there's Zechariah writing this. So there's your fourth character. We've got them. And the Lord said unto Satan, the Lord rebuke thee, O Satan. I like that. You see, Satan is a created entity. He is subjected to the Lord as surely as you and I are subjected to the Lord. Well, why does he have so much influence on me? Because I allow it? Oh, it comes back to me? Yes, it comes back to me. Because I allow it? And I see here the Lord said unto Satan, the Lord's using Satan, just like he's wanting to use you and me. The Lord rebuke thee, O Satan, even the Lord that hath chosen Jerusalem rebuke thee. Is not this a brand plucked out of the fire? And we see that they have been beaten down. They were called to get them to stop in rebuilding the temple, but feeble Jews. But now he's trying to challenge them to raise up. Raise up, come on, let's go. Now Joshua was clothed, I underline that, with filthy garments. Well, now we just noticed that it was the high priest's job, back to verse 1, to keep the people clean, to get the tabernacle clean, the temple clean, therefore the nation clean. The high priest is dirty himself. You're going to miss it if you make a New Testament application. That's an Old Testament application. And that was the job of the high priest. Now, the priesthood of all believers, New Testament, it's my job to keep me clean. And then it's my job to help others that they might stay clean also. So he goes on. Now Joshua was clothed with filthy garments and stood before the angel. The filthy garments is the idea that he was not worthy to be a high priest. So we've got that which dirty that would be trying to encourage us to be clean. We're going to say hypocrite, and we're not going to clean up. And he answered and spake unto those that stood before him, saying, take away the filthy garments from him. And unto him he said, behold, I have caused thine iniquity to pass from thee. We're talking about sin here. We're not talking about needing a washing machine. And I will clothe thee with change of raiment. He's talking about as they've come out of Babylonian captivity, freed by Cyrus, that they have got to start back over and cleanse the high priest to begin with, and then let him do his job, filtering on down to the people. And I said, that I, Zechariah, your fourth character, let them set a fair mitre upon his head. That's a turban. Now we've got a nice garment. So they set a fair mitre upon his head and clothed him with garments. And the angel of the Lord stood by. The angel of the Lord was pleased, supporting what's being done. The angel of the Lord is supporting now a clean high priest to lead the people in being clean. Oh. And the angel of the Lord protested unto Joshua, saying, thus saith the Lord of hosts, if thou wilt walk in my ways, you get the drift now. If you will walk in my ways, if you will not be a dirty high priest, give my people a chance. They've come back, but they haven't rebuilt the temple. They have but rebuilt the foundation, and they ran into an objection, and they stopped growing. They stopped producing, and they built their own homes, and they were fancy and ornate. And God is saying, but what about finishing my house? Oh. If thou wilt walk in my ways, And if thou wilt keep my charge, then thou shalt also judge my house. And he's saying to him, live up to your position, Joshua. I need a faithful high priest. Live up to your position. I look at that, just that expression. And I wonder, what position does my God want me to live up to? I hope you're wondering the same thing. How successful and competent am I in my world? How successful and competent could I be as a part of a congregation of the Lord's church? And I hear God saying, live up to your position. You know what you know. You know the skill level you've got. Live up to your position. If thou wilt keep my charge, then thou shalt also judge my house, and shalt also keep my courts, and I will give thee places to walk among these that stand by. Hear now, O Joshua the high priest, thou and thy fellows that sit before thee, for they are men that are a sign for the branch. For behold, I will bring forth my servant the branch. The sign that Jesus would be brought forth from them as the branch, is that I'm wanting you, Joshua, through the preaching of Zechariah, I'm wanting you to rebuild my temple. You built the foundation and you stopped because of resistance. I'm wanting you to rebuild the temple. Well, but a lot of us cried when we saw how little it was going to be. And those that did not see Solomon's temple were happy about it. He said, neither one of those, both of those are extremes. I'm wanting you to take that as a sign to rebuild my house. And that sign is telling you that not only the high priest, not only Zechariah, not only the angel of the Lord, but that I am with you and am wanting that sign to be to those that know me not. Allow that to be for them. Oh. And that's what he's talking about, the branch. That speaks of Jesus. For behold the stone that I have laid before Joshua. Boy, that's the angel talking to the prophet. The stone. The 118th Psalm in verse 22, the stone, the Messiah, is the cornerstone. And what he's drawing a picture of is that you've now begun to rebuild the temple. And we're to the place of the last stone, the cornerstone. And we get to the place, and that's the stone that he's speaking of. We're to the last stone. He says, for behold, the stone that I've laid before Joshua, upon one stone shall be 7 eyes. Watch the picture, it's a vision. Behold, I will engrave the graving thereof, saith the Lord of hosts, and I will remove the iniquity of that land in one day. He's talking about a day of restoration, a day of eliminating their sin. The high priest has been cleansed. The people have done what they should have done. And now, as that, God says, I'm removing your iniquity in one day. Wow. Turn to chapter 4. Starting in verse 7. We're going to support what we've said. Who art thou, great mountain, before Zerubbabel? Thou shalt become a plain, and shalt bring forth the headstone thereof with shoutings, crying, grace, grace unto it. You've finished your work. Moreover, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, the hands of Zerubbabel have laid the foundation of this house. That's Ezra. His hands shall also finish it. That's the interpretation. And thou shalt know that the Lord of hosts has sent me unto you, for who hath despised the day of small things? Boy, howdy. Part of what had stopped them was the fact that the new temple was going to be so small and so, compared to Solomon's temple, unornate. And some were looking down on the days of small things. We expected more. God said, that's because I expected more of you. Oh, you mean I've brought this on myself? Yes. And that's what I hoped you'd learn in Babylon. And because I love you, I have given you another opportunity. I want you to utilize the opportunity that I've given. You see, it's more than assembling. It's a deep commitment in your heart toward God. It's a deep commitment in your heart to try to treat men as they ought to be treated by God. You see, while I was created in the image of God, I was also recreated to image God. That helps me. That helps me. I was recreated to image God. You throw a circumstance at me, and the question that seems paramount to me is, what would God do right now? What would God do with the opportunity that I've got with this circumstance? I was created, recreated to image God. I find that fascinating. He goes on, for who hath despised the day of small things? For they shall rejoice and shall see the plummet in the hand of Zerubbabel. With those 7, they are the eyes of the Lord. What are the 7 eyes that are in that capstone when they finished it? It's the eyes of the Lord. 7 is the number of God, and God is the all-seeing eye, is what he's setting forth. I see you, where you are, what you're doing, how you respect me, and how you respect others. I see that. The temple has been rebuilt. And you get a new opportunity, which run to and fro through the whole earth. Every place I'm seeing. I'm back in verse 9. For behold, the stone that I have laid before Joshua, upon one stone shall be 7 eyes. Behold, I will engrave the gravings thereof, saith the Lord of hosts, and I will remove the iniquity of that land in one day. I'm giving you a new start. I'm giving you a new start. In that day, saith the Lord of hosts, shall you call every man his neighbor under the vine and under the fig tree. Every man call his neighbor. The new approach, the new day, the new temple is to try to make it that all might have an opportunity to be under the sheltering hand of God. Wow. God gave Haggai and Zechariah to preach this. He would give Malachi, but you see what was the matter with them? Think about this. What was the matter with them was they haven't changed. They hadn't changed from the men and women that went into captivity. You know what that says? That says we may learn too much from our parents' example. We may learn too much from the example of the people that are about us. If what their example is not that which God wants. You see, there was a new generation, but it was a new generation that was just like the old generation. And God is trying to get them to be new. God is trying to get them to make the commitment that speaks to Him of their love for Him, individually, their love for Him. Enjoy Ezra, Nehemiah, Haggai, and Zechariah. The two prophets that God gave in the rebuilding of the temple and to try to reform the people. We set forth thinking that would be good for us as the priests of all believers, offering our own sacrifice to God, to make certain the sacrifice that we're offering to God is not tainted by what we see, but is totally measured by what we know. If you're not a Christian, or if you've pulled away in any fashion, please pull back as together we stand and sing.
Have you been